including Kafka's Clothes, Reading Kafka, and the editor and translator of contemporary Austrian writers Ingeborg Bachmann and Thomas Bernhard. He specializes in German modernism, contemporary Austrian literature, and the theory and practice of translation. He regularly offers courses on modern German Jewish culture from 1750 to the present, on opera and the idea of music in German culture, and on German exile during the Nazi period. In comparative literature, he has taught courses on problems of the Gothic, the materiality of the book in Western culture, and Jewish identity in modern European culture. He's the first director and founder of the Berlin Consortium for German Studies, and he advises students who wish to study in Germany with the Columbia program. So, Mark, I wanted to welcome you today. And I think Mark does not have a full PowerPoint presentation. He's just going to be speaking. Um, we and Stephanie, as you know, we record the a presentation, the opening part. And then if there's a way to turn all the dinging off as people enter the room, that would be nice too. But we'll we'll see how that goes. All right. So Mark, you can begin.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation. Hello, everyone. I can't really see people. I see a few names, but I basically see myself. So I'm not very good with the technology here, but I will imagine all of you and just want to say right away that I'm very glad to be speaking at the Leo Beck because the Leo Beck Institute has been a touchstone for me throughout my career. I started working on Kafka as a dissertation for my dissertation when I was a graduate student. And I remember going to New York to do research at the Leo Beck and discovered the amazing resources that it has. And of course, being in New York during my career at Columbia, I've often been at the Leo Beck or been doing events at the Leo Beck. So anyway,
I think I
anyway,
can continue on.
so I have to admit, I was a bit surprised when I saw the topic of the book, the Tóibín's The Magician, because as you probably know, neither Thomas Mann nor Tóibín are Jewish. But then I was thinking about it, and it makes perfect sense, really, to me. I remember a conversation I had with a contemporary German novelist, quite successful German novelist in her 40s now. And I remember her telling me, insisting to me in a conversation that Thomas Mann was Jewish. And I tried to explain now, no, that his wife was Jewish, but Thomas Mann was not Jewish. You know, he was born in Lubeck, a good Protestant family. But in a sense, she wasn't quite wrong. I think that Thomas Mann, not only because his wife was Jewish and because technically his children were half Jewish, um, Thomas Mann, more importantly, embraced those liberal democratic values of the Weimar Republic in the 1920s that made him an enemy of the Nazis. And so he had to go into exile. He and his family went into exile. They were wanted, they were hunted, they would have suffered and been discriminated against and much worse if they had remained in Germany. And so Thomas Mann's life very much marks through the caesura, the kind of rift that he and his family experienced in the 1930s. Really exemplifies that great rift and caesura in Jewish life in Germany in the 20th century. And I think in that deeper sense, what happened to him and the ways in which he had to conduct his life are in parallel with these questions of Jewish German identity in the 20th century. So it makes perfect sense to me to to have him on the reading list for the Leo Beck. I don't want to rehearse. I've been teaching Thomas Mann for many years. I've been reading him as long as I can remember. And I don't want to try and give you a synopsis of his life or his work. Those are things you can easily find online. But I really want to zero in on just a few aspects, three aspects actually, that I think are particularly relevant for discussion of Colm Tóibín's presentation of his life. And those three things are, so I would like to speak somewhat casually and even anecdotally and biographically about three things that have interested me in Thomas Mann's life and I think are particularly relevant to Colm Tóibín's presentation. One is Thomas Mann's relationship to Judaism. One is the question of homosexuality. And then the third is really the question of realist fiction and the relationship between biography and fiction, which is, I think, a very important aspect of Tóibín's book. A controversial aspect, I think in some ways a problematic aspect, but also a very rich aspect that I hope can serve the purposes of discussion. So again, three topics. One, the relationship to Judaism. The second is homosexuality. The third is biography and fiction. The Thomas Mann's relationship to Judaism, I don't know if anyone has ever read an early story of Thomas Mann's called Blood of the Volsungs. This is a story, a scandalous story that he wrote in 1904 when he was a young man. He was already a famous novelist because his great novel, Buddenbrooks, had been published in 1900 and had made him, at the age of 25, into a celebrity in Germany, quite famous and also increasingly wealthy. But he sat down to write in 1904 a story that was based on things that he had seen in his wife's family. Thomas Mann's wife was named Katja Pringsheim. The Pringsheim family were from Munich. Her father was a mathematician, a professor of mathematics who taught at the university. But they were very, very cultured, a very cultured family, and especially interested in music. Alfred Pringsheim, Thomas Mann's father-in-law, was a fanatic Wagnerian. And Thomas Mann found this, I think, was quite taken or perplexed or puzzled by this relationship of his wife's assimilated Jewish family, who were such passionate advocates for someone who was, after all, one of the worst anti-Semites in German history. I don't know if you've read Richard Wagner's diatribe against Jews in music or Judaism in music, but it's quite an upsetting text in which he argues that Jewish musicians can never truly be creative because they do not have that organic relationship to the folk, to the people. They've been cut off from that originary relationship and therefore can only be imitators of culture, not true creators, true composers. This is a text that was very, very popular throughout the 19th century. Hitler probably read it. He was a big fan of Wagner. And so the whole question of German nationalism, anti-Semitism, and Wagner were ones that I think Thomas Mann felt, well, why is a Jewish family like the Pringsheim family so willing to forget that aspect uh, of Wagner? And so he wrote a story, and it's set in the Tiergarten district of Berlin. Uh, People say that Thomas Mann got the idea when he visited relatives of the Pringsheim family in Berlin. Um, but he depicts this very wealthy, very cultured Jewish family um, that has two beautiful twin children. And these twins are quite in love with each other, infatuated with each other. It's a boy and a girl, or a young woman and a young man. And the young woman is supposed to be married to a non-Jewish man. And in setting up the story this way, Thomas Mann basically is describing his own relationship to the Pringsheim family. Um, and as you know, you may know, his wife Katja had a twin named Klaus, and the two of them, he felt, had a relationship since birth that made him a kind of outsider. Um, and so Thomas Mann describes, I won't give away the story, but it's quite a scandalous story involving incest and a trip to the opera to see the Valkyrie. And when news of this story, which was about to be published in the most prestigious literary journal of the time, the Neue Rundschau, when news of the story reached his father-in-law's ears, the father-in-law, Alfred Pringsheim, called his son-in-law in and dressed him down for revealing the family secrets and exposing the family, and basically accused him of being anti-Semitic. Thomas Mann reacted defensively, but he agreed to withdraw the story from publication. And so what would have been a real scandal in the young author's life, involving a kind of expose of his wife's Jewish family, and all sorts of how should I say, questionable behavior. Uh, Suddenly that was removed from the public realm, and life was able to continue. But I mention this story, and I urge you to read it if you're interested in this aspect of Thomas Mann's life, um, because it really shows a kind of troubling aspect of Mann's relationship to Judaism, in which he's really quite conservative, quite critical, and shares a lot of the nationalist German ideas about Jewish identity that were current at the turn of the century. The Thomas Mann of 1900, of 1910, is a very different person than the Thomas Mann of the Weimar period of the 1920s and 30s. And it really takes World War I to change this young nationalist German uh, into a convinced European-minded Democrat who sees the danger of German nationalism. So in any case, that is, I think, an important aspect of Thomas Mann's life. The fact not only that not just that he had this problematic relationship to Judaism that was a cliche that was common to his time, but more importantly, that he was able to rise above it, to break with that view, and to become a very, very different political thinker in the 1920s and 30s, and emerge really as one of National Socialism's great critics And you might know that Thomas Mann, when he came to the United States with his family when he was in exile, would do a series of broadcasts back to Germany, speaking against the Nazis. He engaged in a kind of Allied propaganda against the Nazi regime, trying to convince Germany that German culture was not represented by the Nazis, but by writers like himself, writers and artists in exile. Okay, so that's one aspect. The other aspect is homosexuality. I remember when I was a student reading Thomas Mann's Death in Venice, I had a gay professor, but a closeted gay professor, um, who loved Thomas Mann, but who never, ever talked about homosexuality. Um, that it was all about Death in Venice, the story of an older man who falls in love with a young boy in Venice, that it's all about the Greek ideal, it's about Dionysus and Apollonian forces. It's about Nietzsche. It's not about homosexuality. And this kind of, how should I say, I think there were generations of gay readers and lovers of Thomas Mann's works um, who uh, read him very much in terms of their own sexuality, but did not acknowledge it publicly. And it was kind of a secret uh, in plain sight for many, many years, certainly throughout Thomas Mann's life. And it was really only with the publication of Thomas Mann's diaries that his cover was blown and that his identity as a homosexual was made clear to everyone. And I think it's quite striking that Mann kept those diaries, that the family kept those diaries, and that eventually those diaries were allowed to be published. If you're interested in the topic, I think the best book is to read on this is Anthony Heilbut's book, his biography of Thomas Mann, Eros and Literature. I think it came out in 1996. And it's really quite an astonishing read of Mann's homosexuality, which was of a particular sort of homosexuality, more imagined than lived. Thomas Mann, after all, was married and had 5 children, 5 or 6 children. Um, uh, but but nonetheless, from a very early age on to the end of his life, a kind of homosexual desire is an animating force in all of his writing, not just his private writings, but also his literary writings, his published work. Um, and and of course, this is of great interest to Colm Tóibín. Colm Tóibín is a colleague of mine at Columbia. Uh, we did a book presentation on this book at Columbia in Deutsches Haus when it came out. I was on the panel, so I was able to talk to him about it. I have this funny relationship with Tóibín. I don't know him well, but he teaches his Joyce seminar at Columbia in a classroom that's opposite my office. And so very often I would come from class back to my office to hold office hours, and I would see Tóibín sitting on a bench outside of my office, and I always have the feeling, oh, is he here for my office hours? No, he's just waiting for the classroom to be free and to start his Joyce seminar, very popular seminar at Columbia, the Ulysses seminar. Um, but Tóibín is gay, and he's very interested in writers, realist writers like Henry James, about whom he's also written a novelized biography. And and it's clear to me that in his interest in Thomas Mann it comes very much from this question of writing and homosexual desire. Um, and his book, you probably have noticed, is very selective in its choice of biographical moments. But the key moments often have to do with stages of Thomas Mann's erotic life, his awakening sexuality as a young man in Lubeck, when he has his first um, adventures with a classmate, the son of a schoolmaster that he was living with at the time when his family left Lubeck, all the way down to the end of his life. But Tóibín is, I would say, particularly interested in the ways in which Mann's um, homosexual desire or interest in a particular thing is useful for writing particular scenes and particular books. Um, and so again and again, he focuses on key moments in Mann's life when you can see the creative spark, the idea for a scene or the idea for a book emerging in a particular way. And Tóibín is quick to put a link between this creativity and homosexuality. Um, so let me turn now to the third and last topic that I think is worth mentioning, and that I hope all of these topics, I think, should be ones that we can discuss in the actual discussion. But that's the relationship between biography and fiction. Tóibín, like Thomas Mann, can be considered a realist novelist. Um, it involves using reality, using biographies, using actual aspects of the writer's life as the basis for the writing. Thomas Mann's great breakthrough novel, and perhaps his greatest novel ever written, was very much an autobiographical account of his family in Lubeck of over several generations. The Buddenbrooks, the decline of a family, in which he appears as Hanno, the last living heir of the Buddenbrook family. And I guess the question that I'd like to raise, the question that interests me, the one that I raised with Tóibín himself when we did the book presentation, is what is permissible when you are a biographer in how much you invent of the scenes that you're creating. When you create a dialogue that between two people that you know took place, but you don't actually have the words for that dialogue. When you put words into people's mouths, is that a legitimate action on the part of a biographer? Now, Tóibín has written a novel, but it's not a novel with a completely invented character or a composite character. It's a novel that closely follows the stations, the dates, the people, the events in Thomas Mann's life. He's drawing on a public record. He's drawing on the lives of real people who not only lived, but in some cases are still living. The descendants of Mann's family who appear as the grandchildren, some of those people are still alive. So he's making use of these real lives, but again and again, he is inventing, imagining, putting words into the mouths of certain characters to the point where one doesn't know where fiction stops and reality begins. or vice versa, where the real record of a life stops and Tóibín's imagination takes over. Um, and I asked Tóibín about this, and he said, well, my criterion is the reader. I don't, I'm worried about my reader. I want to entertain, I want to amuse the reader. I don't feel a responsibility um, to the historical record. I feel like as a novelist, I have that freedom to invent when I want to go beyond uh, what I know to be true, what I can document to be true. And so I won't take a position on this. I just wanted to lay out that question for you because I think it is an ethical question. I think it's a question that um, comes up again and again in contemporary fiction today. You probably have heard the term autofiction. People who often who write writers who use their own biographies, but as a kind of springboard for fiction, where you don't know if where their actual life stops and where the fiction begins. Some of you may know the work of a contemporary novelist who passed away 20 years ago, but a man named W.G. Sebald, who wrote the book The Emigrants and Rings of Saturn and others, hailed as one of the great writers of the contemporary German literature. He uses pictures and documents and real lives and in creating his stories. He doesn't use the word novel, he uses long story. But he invents certain key aspects of these things. He transforms the stories while continuing to use the documentary material. And he's been accused really of a kind of unethical exploitation of the lives and the suffering of people who of people he's writing about, and that it's a kind of unethical use of the past. Tóibín's procedure is somewhat different. He doesn't use pictures, for instance. There's less use of documents or overt use of documents. But I think some of those same questions of the ethics of how a creative writer of fiction uses real people's lives is a very pertinent question for Tóibín's book, The Magician, as well as for many books that are being written and read in our time. So, okay, so that is basically what I wanted to say. Um, and I hope it can be used as a springboard for the discussion. My understanding is that Michael will take over the moderating and the question asking, and that I will become a participant like the rest of you in the discussion. And I very much look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.